Welcome back, Wisdom Walkers, and to my new viewers, thank you for visiting my channel, Life Lessons Learned. In this video, I'm going to talk about the impact our actions have that sometimes we have no idea what the ripple effects would be. Hopefully, we're wanting them to be positive ones, okay? Well, if you saw one of my previous videos talking about the best friend I resisted, you'll know that in that video I share how I worked as a community liaison person for a an organization that sold houses to low to moderate income families, and in my capacity in that position, I would greet the new prospective owners of the houses that we marketed, and I would acclimate them to the neighborhood, let them know about the schools and the system, and introduce them to other neighbors and encourage them to attend neighborhood events. I mean, it was really a fun job because I like working with people and all of that. And there were a lot of freebies for me and my girls as well because I held that position. So whenever they had, let's say, a play that was coming to the theater, or one time we took a airplane ride on a engine small engine, I don't know how you say it, one engine plane, but anything that they would bring to the community, my girls and I had access to all of that. But that's getting off of this story. So at this time, I had bought a beautiful home, and I'll talk to you about how all of that occurred later because I didn't wind up getting it from the company that I worked for, but that's another whole tale. And um, so worked in that capacity, and I had brought this beautiful home for me and my girls, and it wasn't a dead end street because you could, you could go, drive through it, but it was just one block long. So it was a house that was on a block that only had, houses on one side and houses on the other, and then just a short street that would go off into the other parts of the neighborhood. Well, on this block, I had, but again, I'm a community liaison, so I know the neighbors and, I'm waving to them, talking to them, and things like that. Well, one day, one of the neighbors asked me to, come into her home. And she had one of those enclosed outdoor porches. So it was a porch that they can sit on the outside of, but it was still screened in and everything, glassed in, so you could still see what's going on in the neighborhood. And you know how people are. So people are always looking at everything and telling on the kids and that kind of thing. But I went to join her and her husband, and she was talking to me about, how the neighborhood used to be, which I get that. People talk about the good old days and that kind of thing. And how about all of the changes that she had seen over the years, the decades of her and her husband having lived there. So, very interesting. And if you remember my past childhood videos, I love history and I love finding out how people met, meaning couples or, things like that. And so I was really fascinated by all of these stories she would tell. So, from that particular invite, I would go there like maybe once or twice a week and just sit with her and her husband. And, we would talk and look out the things that were going on in the neighborhood. Well, at one of these visits, she happened to share with me that she had a sister. Okay, I have a sister too, and that she and her sister had been really close over the years, but that something had happened years ago, and she said was probably about 23 or 25 years ago. And her sister had some type of a misunderstanding or miscommunication, or words were exchanged, and she hadn't talked to her sister since then. And I have three sisters, so it was, I can understand how she felt about that. And you guys are going to say, okay, this lady is not that much of a saint, but all of my siblings always thought that I was their favorite sibling because I was the one that was always settling conflicts, always the one to learn to listen and listen to learn, and always trying to mediate between all of them. And usually, the story of King Solomon wise and being fair with his judgments. Usually, the options that I would come up with in my youth were things that both parties could agree to, and no one felt like they were being cheated or unfairly treated or anything like that. But anyway, she was telling me about this story with her and her sister. And, I listened to her and everything. And I was like, and you've never, reached out over the years or tried to call or contact her? And she explained that their phone numbers have been changed and they don't have, communication with each other. So I was like, oh, I mean, there's got to be some family, events or get togethers, weddings, funerals, or something. But you can't force people to be ready for something that they're just simply not ready for. So I didn't think a lot of it. I was like, well, she's just sharing with me that kind of thing. Well, again, because I worked in the neighborhood, there were, other people that I would talk to and stop and chat with and things like that. And there was this one lady that lived directly across the street from me. So just so you have this idea, remember, my street was only one block long. So it wasn't like it was probably five, six, seven, about eight houses on one side and eight on the other. And that was it. And this particular lady lived directly across the street from me. I mean, if I stood on my porch, and you looked across, you would see her porch. And all of these houses were nice, older homes, 2-story homes. It was very nice. And so one day I happened to be talking to the lady who lived across from me. I happened to be talking to her husband. He was out raking the leaves and he was like, "Hey, Sherry, how's it going?" And I said, "Oh, it's fine." And these people were older. Like I said, they were older. So you just kind of take your time and chat with them. So he, asked me how I was doing, and I kind of walked over to where he was raking the leaves, and we were talking about the weather changing and that kind of thing. And then out of the blue, because I certainly didn't ask him or anything, he happened to tell me that his wife, which was, they lived right across from me, so his wife was not well. He said that she was going through some difficult health challenges. And he said the only thing that he was wishing for her was that, she would reunite with some family members. And so I thought about the lady who lived on the same block. And I was like, that's really strange. I said, because we don't use real names in these videos, even though everything I say is based on true actual events. So I don't embellish. I don't lie about anything. These are things that actually happened. So I just happened to remember the lady down the street had told me that she was, no longer or estranged from her sister. So I just, mentioned it. And I said, Miss Holmes was just telling me that she wished that she, could get back together with her sister. I said, what are the odds that two people on this one block would be, in that same position? And he looked at me and he said, are you, are you trying to be funny? And I was like, no, there's nothing, funny about that situation. And he said, she didn't tell you? And I'm like, first of all, who is she? I mean, I'm talking to you and the other lady I was talking to that have anything to do with this conversation. And he says, that's my wife's sister. You guys, you could have knocked me over with a feather. So the first thing I'm thinking, I didn't say this to him because I'm still trying to process all of this and trying to figure out what the hell. I said, wait, Miss Holmes is your wife's sister? And he said, yeah. He said they fell out years ago and they haven't talked to each other since. And I'm thinking, she told me the lady, her sister changed her number and she didn't have a way of getting in touch with advice. Again, I didn't say that to him because I'm like, my name is Wes. I'm not trying to be in this mess. Ah, okay. So I was like, oh, okay. I said, but does she know that your wife is sick? And he said, no, she wouldn't know because they're not talking. So I'm thinking, well, you could talk to your brother-in-law because both the ladies were married. So, but like I said, you never know what stage people are at in whatever chaos they're going through. So I was like, well, and I didn't want to put him in the middle of nothing because just like I said, my name is Wes. I'm trying to stay out of this mess. He may have said, I'm the lieutenant and I ain't in it. Okay. But I was like, okay, so, but if they both really are regretting that and they both are still here and they live on the same friggin' block and you're a negotiator and a communicator and a peace mediator, there's got to be a way without divulging the confidences that have been told to me that I could get these two together. So I said to him, I said, well, if her sister said the same thing and she's feeling like that, couldn't I encourage, one of you guys to ask for the other's number? And he was like, Sherry, it's just been so long. Even now, I know they say that, but I just don't know if that's, possible. So I thought to myself, I'll kind of think this one through and see, what I could do, if anything. So the next time that I went to the ladies down the street house, because she had invited me to, come on up on the porch and talk with her, I I let her, share some more stories with me and everything. And then I said, I talked to, we're going to say this other lady's husband's name is Jim. I said, I was talking to Jim the other day, and he's always really nice. And she said, yeah, he's a pretty good guy. And I said, he told me something that you hadn't shared with me. And she was like, I guess he did. And I said, yeah, you didn't tell me that, his wife is your sister. I was under the impression that you guys didn't have a way to contact each other. You hadn't seen each other. I'm sure you saw her getting her mail, if nothing else. But didn't go there. And she said, yeah, she said, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have misled you. She said, yeah, we live down the street from each other. We've been on the same street for years. And she said, but, neither one of us, have apologized or approached the other. I said, well, interestingly enough, you had told me last week that you were, looking to make amends. And I said, and Jim told me that his wife was saying the same thing about your situation. And she sat up and she said, are you serious? And I said, yeah. And she said, you're not kidding me or setting me up. And I was like, first of all, I don't have a dog in this fight. Okay. Well, I'm not part of your family. I'm not setting you up. We'll talk about family setups later with my family. Okay. That's neither here nor there. So um, she said, well, I'm definitely open to that. And I said, like, how open? Like, you want to make it happen today or you want to sleep on it, Because again, people have to be ready to make whatever move that you're asking them to make. So she said, well, when would you be talking to her next? And I said, I can talk to her or, her husband later on today. I said, the sooner you guys can do that, the more time you'll have with each other. Because I couldn't, of course, tell her that her sister was ill. That was not for me to divulge. So, so she said, "Yeah, I'll be willing to do that." And she said, "Hold on," and she went into the house and she got her husband and she told him, what had just transpired between the two of us. And he said, "I was hoping all these years that someone would get them together." He said, "Who would thought it would be someone new on the block that doesn't really know anything, not doesn't know anything, but wasn't aware of the whole situation and all of that." And I said, "It doesn't matter where the tie-ins come from as long as they get tied up, okay?" So, he said he thought that would be a good idea, and so I told him, I said, "I'll go down and talk with her because I didn't want to get into the let me get your number, I'll have her call, that kind of thing." I was like, I like to do this kind of things are best done face to face, and that way you can see people's if there is first of all, you can see their facial expressions when they're giving you information, and you can see if there's any hesitancy or any avoidance with their body language and things like that, if they're, really on board with everything. So, to make a long story short, oops, too late, I left that woman's house, and their houses, you guys remember I said there are only 8 houses on the block, so I walked like 4 houses down And I knocked on the door, and that lady's husband answered. I said, "Hey, Jim, I was just talking to so and so, and she mentioned everything to her husband, and they're saying that she's saying that she's ready to speak with your wife, today." And he says, "Are you kidding?" And I said, "No." I said, "I mean, I just think it's time to bury that hatchet and let these two talk things out." So he called his wife to the door, and we went over everything. And she said, if she comes, if she's willing to meet me halfway, down the block, again, 4 houses away, um, then I would meet with her. And I would think I was more excited about this whole thing than they were. I practically ran to the lady's house, and I was like, she said she'll meet you halfway down the block. So that's what they did. They met, each walking, how they say one is eastward bound, one is westbound, but they actually met in the middle of the block. And just to be facetious, I said, "Let me introduce you, ladies." And I introduced them, and I said, "And I really am grateful that you both were ready and willing at this point to do what's needed to get back together." And of course, they were both crying already, and they stood there and they hugged each other. And it was an emotional event, but it was also a personal, private one. So I didn't want to stand there gawking. So I told each of them that I would visit with them later on that week, and that it was just good that they were able to do that. Now, they were older, so they didn't like stand on in the middle of the block the whole time. The one sister that had the enclosed porch invited her to come up, and she asked if her husband would want to join them as well. And she said no, that she just wanted to talk with her sister. So the lady with the enclosed porch, her husband went inside the house, and the two sisters were there on that enclosed porch, talking, laughing, holding hands. I'm not going to cry. And just, reminiscing over the years that they missed, they had chosen to miss with one another. You guys, the shocking part of this whole thing is that these two sisters lived on the same block, on the same side of the street, like 4 houses away. And for me, at that time in my life, I didn't understand. One second here. I didn't understand how family dynamics could get to that point because when you hear my family dynamics, you'd be like, oh, heaven, you did know they can get to that point. But we always think that our families are the most dysfunctional ones until we start meeting other families and their issues and learning what's going on and everything. But for me, it just didn't make any sense. And now, um, yeah. So just to let you know, the one sister that was ill, it turned out that she had stage 4 cancer. And her husband knew it. And one of the regrets that she had was, she did want to be reunited with her sister. And you guys, after they met on that block that day, they were at each other's houses doing barbecues. They would come to some of the neighborhood events that we had together. It was just really great. And I think she lasted for about like another 18 months. But her and her sister were almost inseparable from that time on. And they were in their late 60s and early 70s. So I think one sister was like 68 and the other was 72 or something like that. And yes, of course, they had missed many years, but when I tell you people that made up for it, they really were. And um, they both came to me probably about 4 or 5 months after that first meeting on the block, and they thanked me, and they said, "You had no idea that we were even sisters. You had no idea of our past or any of that, and you were willing to, step in and assist us to be able to get back together. And we both want you to know that we appreciate everything that you've done." But you guys, it really wasn't me. It was a lady telling me her story, her past, a husband telling me about his wife and her past. and bringing those two together, but they were the ones that took the steps, literally, to meet halfway on the block. So, not going to be a sissy. I'm going to go ahead and close this one out by saying, remember, knowledge is in the knowing, but wisdom is in the doing. And the true learning of a lesson is the application of it. What knowledge, what lesson would you apply in your life moving forward? This is Sherry Brantley. This is Life Lessons Learned. Please leave a comment about a time when you had some type of a misunderstanding, miscommunication, a fallout with a neighbor, a friend, a relative, sibling, how long it lasted, and what were the results or the outcome of it, or has it been resolved? And you guys will hear much later um, some of the things that I talked about with my own family unit and how I was later able to understand, yeah, siblings could actually go without talking for decades, and usually it's over some slight or some silly misunderstanding. And then ego gets in the way and pride gets in the way. And then no one wants to be the first to say, that sounds like a Glass Night song. No one wants to be the first to say, farewell, my love. Okay. In this case, no one wants to be the first to apologize. Please leave a comment below. And if you're so inclined, please subscribe to my Wisdom Walkers. I will see you all on the next video. And just to let you know, my next video is going to be a two-parter. I'm going to be talking about how I moved across country with no plans. So that one has more details. So that's why it will be a two-parter. I'll see you all then. Bye-bye.